Good evening, and welcome to episode 6 of Spooky Town Tales. I'm your host, Morgan, and joining me this evening, as per the norm, is the handsome devil himself, Jeremiah Burrow.
Good evening.
How are you?
I'm well, sorry, just finishing pizza from McDonald's.
Polishing off the leftovers. When you become a father, you
Typical.
become the family bin.
Yep, the dad bin.
You don't have Horton to help you polish off the leftovers anymore too.
Mr. Dad bin.
Mr. Dadbin. It's nice to meet you, Mr. Dadbin. And thanks again for joining me this evening in the spooky seats. Tonight we are discussing the subject of doppelgangers. Not to be confused, which I found a lot of people did. I did. Just goes to show there's a popular misconception. The term doppelganger is not the same as a dead ringer. A dead ringer is an old-fashioned saying for someone who looks the same, and genetically, with 8 billion people in the world, there's going to be a match for every single person. Genetically, there's only so many combinations that can occur.
Yep.
So a doppelganger is not a dead ringer. It's not someone that looks a lot like you that's alive. Tonight I'm going to be explaining to you what the shitted doppelganger actually is, and it's pretty dark and scary.
Well, there you go. You've already crossed that one off for me. I didn't know. I thought they were the same thing.
So there you go. I've already started to blow your mind, and it's only the lid of Pandora's box that is all this reason. I've been researching like a mother lecker this week, and I just want to say hello and welcome back to you all that are listening. I super duper appreciate you coming back yet again. It's friggin' great to have your feedback again. I had some really awesome messages.
Cool news stories.
Really cool news stories. I've had some that confirm and back up stories from previous episodes, which is just the absolute coolest when it all lines up like that. So thank you, everyone.
Did you get any from the lights from last week?
Oh, yes, I did actually.
You did?
I did, but I'm not gonna bring that up in this one. I think I'm gonna do a follow up.
Nice.
Gonna do a follow up.
Well, that one can go on and on and on, really.
It could go on and on and on. But yes, I had confirmation of someone else who's experienced the lights on the road chasing the cars.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's pretty freaking cool.
We'll look forward to that one.
So that will be coming up in the next UFO episode, which will be in a few weeks' time. We got to spread it out.
Yeah.
There's so much to talk about in this realm. So
share the spooky stories.
We've got to spread it out like batter.
Out.
You know, it's evenly spread.
Nice.
So welcome back. Now sit down, relax, turn out those lights, pour yourself a drink, and prepare to be
Beautiful. That was crap.
So to start this episode off, I thought the best thing to do would be give some descriptions as to what the heck a doppelganger is, followed by some of the creepiest stories that I've found and received.
What is a doppelganger, Morgan?
What's a doppelganger, you say?
It is what I say.
A doppelganger, it's actually a German term.
Right.
And it actually means a paranormal duplicate of an individual. So the translation into English is double walker.
Ooh. That's
So
a creepy name to start with.
It's a creepy name to start with. It's basically your paranormal twin. It's someone who, another version of you, and I'm not talking someone that looks like you, it's literally you, but in like a different spiritual kind of form. And basically they manifest in various different ways. So it's the old folklore is a doppelganger is a shadow self that's thought to basically accompany every single person.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
So everyone
this is
could
the folklore.
be carrying one around.
Carrying one around, but they don't show themselves unless, so the story goes.
Yeah.
They're like, there's impending doom. So before your death, they show up just to sort of go, okay, mate,
Whoa.
It's time to go. But apparently, as I go through, I'll describe you the various theories behind the doppelganger. But the basic thing is, it's a paranormal version of you.
Mm-hmm. That's pretty creepy.
It's really creepy. Now, as opposed to a dead ringer, is, like we said before, is someone who's just genetically similar to you.
A spitting image.
A spitting image, looks a lot like you, but they live completely different lives, completely different everything. They're not.
Are actually there.
They're actually not. They're not actually you. Now, there's also this other theory that comes with it. It's confused with the term biolocation, which is a psychic ability to project an image of yourself to a second location. So this has been something that's been documented throughout history.
Yeah.
That there are people with the ability to go somewhere psychically and project an image of themselves elsewhere. So this is where doppelgangers, it's all tied in.
Okay.
So that's pretty cool. So it's the ability. Now the reason why I got interested in this whole topic was I have seen myself on not just one occasion. I have seen Jimmy 3 times.
Yeah.
When he's not been there, and so have our children.
Yeah, it's worse because the girls have seen it too.
It's worse when you've got witnesses that have seen it as well. So, as we delve into this, I'll be sharing my experiences with my own, or Jimmy's, doppelganger. So, with regards to biolocation, basically the body double, the way that people realise it, is completely indistinguishable as anyone but this person. Yeah. So they're an absolute
carbon copy.
Even regards body language, everything.
Yep.
So people generally think it's the real person. And it's only later that they discover, you weren't actually, what? You weren't there? Are you sure?
Yeah.
I just saw you in the lounge room. You know, that's generally how it happens.
Yeah.
Now, there's another term for doppelgangers. This is throughout several cultures, ancient cultures.
Yeah.
These things exist. So in British folklore, they're known as wraiths.
Okay.
Which I'm sure a lot of you would have heard of wraiths because they've been referenced in a lot of, TV shows.
Yeah.
So they've been mentioned. But basically, the theory behind the British wraith is that once a living person who is made, it's basically a living person who's made undead without passing through death.
Okay.
So it's the only form of an undead person not made so through animation. So basically giving lifelike qualities to a recently deceased.
Yeah.
So that's the British theory behind a doppelganger. So they've died, but they haven't died. So they're neither living or dead.
Okay.
They're just sort of in the in-between.
In-between.
Yeah.
In a limbo.
In limbo. But it's weird that they look exactly like a living person.
Yeah.
But I'll be referring back to all of these theories as I'm reading out incidences of doppelgangers to just show you where and why these theories have come about, because there is an astonishing amount of just it all matches basically.
Yeah.
To very specific things.
Yeah, one thing you honestly have probably brought to my attention too is the weirdness of, like you were saying, how different cultures have viewed what can be tied together as the same thing.
Yes.
And
in a time where the world was completely separate.
Absolutely.
That's what freaks me out. When there's cultures that never knew each other existed and they've got the same stories of these same things that have existed
can be tied
forever.
Together, so buttoned up.
Exactly the same.
Same box, everything.
Yeah.
But from different corners of the world and never seen each other.
Yeah. It just sort of makes it sort of concrete a little bit.
It does. It gives it a different...
It gives it more validation.
Yeah, a lot more.
Yeah. So the ancient Egyptians and in Norse mythology, they both have references to body doubles. So it goes as far back as, the most ancient of civilizations. There is documented cases of these body doubles.
Okay.
They weren't as ominous in those cultures, and as time went on, doppelgangers were associated with bad omens and darkness and death.
Okay.
That only became a popular theory in the mid-19th century because there was a massive, big interest, it became very popular to be interested in the paranormal in both the US and Europe. It was like a cultural fad.
Yeah.
It was huge. People would have seance parties, and it just became like, it was a fad.
So instead of fondue, you'd be
bringing up your old dead uncle. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Hey, Margaret, would you like to come over and we'll raise your dead husband?
What's been cracking?
What's been cracking? Can you bring a crucifix just in case? Yep, it was a weird time, the mid 1900s. So that's another sort of theory that it became tainted, the whole.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, you can see why, because as I recount these stories, you can see why they were like, well, it's definitely bad if you see yourself.
It's not great.
It's not great. It's really not great. Now, another theory that I've sort of linked along the lines, and I don't know if listeners may have heard of the term psychopomps.
I haven't.
No?
Personally.
That's something that pops. Something you use on a daily basis, that term?
No.
Well, a psychopomp is like a guider of souls.
Right.
So they show up around the time that someone's, basically stuffed, and
Yeah.
it's their time, so to speak, and they help guide that person to the next realm.
Okay.
So there's a theory that doppelgangers may be a form of a psychopomp, but generally throughout, here it is, generally throughout history, they're more so in the form of like animals or dogs, deer, ravens, crows, owls. That's generally how they've been depicted, a psychopomp. But they're a form of spirit or angel guide, basically. This is, old folklore, a psychopomp. So there's a theory that that's what a doppelganger is, because so many of the stories where people have actually seen their own doppelganger has ended in them dying shortly afterwards.
Uh-huh.
So hence, it's become a bit of a bad omen to see a doppelganger.
Fair enough.
If other people see it, it's okay. But if someone else, if you see it, I'm afraid to say it's
probably not great.
It's not great. So just to clarify a little bit, in Western culture, in our culture, a psychopomp that you would know would be the Grim Reaper.
Oh, okay.
So the Grim Reaper is a collector of souls.
Yeah, right. Yep. So don't go walking with the psychopomp.
Don't go to the pub with the psychopomp. Unless it's not your psychopomp. I'm sure if it's someone else's, I'm sure you'd have a real interesting night. Yeah. Take him out for dinner first. Now, to start off the stories of famous doppelgangers, I thought it only fair to start the show with the coolest one I've ever heard.
Yeah.
And it's unbelievable. Now, you'll have to forgive my pronunciation because I've been practicing, but I don't know how well I'm going to go. Right. But this is the case of Emily Sager. Now, every other person I've heard read or do any kind of information on this girl says Sager, but I looked up the French pronunciation and it's Sager.
Okay.
So I'm right and you're wrong.
You kicked it out of the park from what I could say, so don't worry about it.
So that's her name. Yep. We'll just call her Emily in this case. Yep. Now, this story is just wild. It's so freaking cool. So she was a teacher. She was 32. She was a French woman. She was a fabulous teacher. Yeah. Really, really good. All the kids she taught loved her. There was only one strange thing, and that was that she taught, when she was hired at the last documented school that she worked at, which was called, bear with me, Pensionnat van Nieuwelke.
Oh, well done.
Thank you. She was hired there because there was a massive shortage of decent teachers. This is in the 1840s.
Yep.
So when she was hired there, they were a little bit suspicious because she'd been to, this would be the 19th school in 16 years that she taught at.
Whoa.
With the incredible references, nothing but good news, but she'd been fired from every single one.
Oh, weird.
So that was the first, okay. So
You're good, but you might be too good.
you might be too good. So that was you know, the start of her career, or
Yeah.
not the start of the weirdness, I should say.
Yeah, that's right.
And basically, what came about was that word spread that weird, spooky stuff was happening and following her from school to school.
Okay.
Stuff, all that they knew was strange stuff that couldn't be explained.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this is what happened. So she was working, this was in Latvia. It was near Volmar in Latvia.
Mm-hmm.
One day in 1845, while she was writing on the blackboard, her exact double appeared beside her. The doppelganger precisely copied the teacher's every move as she wrote, except that she didn't have any chalk in her hand. So it was another copy of her.
Whoa.
Next to her, 13 children in the class all witnessed this.
Mm-hmm.
She stood next to her and copied every single move she was making. Yeah, so all the kids saw this, right?
That is crazy.
Now, during the next year that she was working there,
Yeah.
her doppelganger was seen several times.
That's great.
So people would see her walking down the hall and then walk into her class and she'd be sitting at a desk.
Yeah.
The freakiest one took place, there was 42 students on a summer day. This is in 1846.
Yeah.
They were sitting at long tables doing their work, and Emily was in the garden. She was doing a gardening class with some kids.
Right, yeah.
So she's out in the garden gathering some flowers, and she got a different teacher to fill in for her other class, which was the big group of kids that were inside at the long tables.
Yeah.
So they're in there. I believe it was a sewing class. So there's another teacher sitting there. When Emily walks through the door, excuses the other teacher and sits down at the desk. So the other teacher leaves, right?
Right.
And apparently Emily sat in the chair and just stared at every single child and just watched what they were doing. So made eye contact with them all. But then two of the students at the back noticed they could see her out the window in the garden.
What?
So completely freaked out, the kids, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
So that was another instance.
That's crazy.
Two girls got brave
Mm-hmm.
because they were like, what the hell's going on?
Yeah.
And approached her, and they tried to touch her
Yeah.
because they were like, what is this?
Yeah.
We've seen her appear and disappear before. Like they just had to know.
Yeah.
So they tried to touch her, and they said there was a form of odd resistance in the air surrounding her, and when they touched her, it was like thick fabric feeling, but the hand went straight through her.
Whoa.
And she remained staring at them this whole time.
Whoa, just to make it more
Just
creepy.
to make it more creepy. So the hands passed through her, and then she vanished in front of the whole class again. So this is documented, guys. This is documented by multiple witnesses. This isn't just a fictional story someone's made up. This actually happened, and apparently it continued on.
Yeah.
So that was just one of the last times, like the last straws.
Yeah.
There was another instance in the dining area where she was sitting eating her meal, and this is what freaks me out. So it appeared directly behind her. All the children saw.
Yeah.
It's standing behind her and was copying her eating with no utensils.
Whoa. What,
So it's
standing or
standing behind her, eating, doing exactly what she was doing.
That's so weird.
It's so weird. And what is really weird is when they asked Emily what's going on,
Yeah.
she said the times where people have said they've seen this doppelganger, she gets groggy. And she'd said the time that they all saw her in the classroom and she was in the garden, she said she felt groggy,
Yeah.
but was secretly wishing she was inside teaching the sewing class instead of being outside in the garden.
Whoa.
So this may be an instance of what did I call it again? Hang on, I've already lost it. This could be an instance of her having that psychic ability to biolocation, to relocate herself to where she wants to be. But this was happening at every single school, to the point the children were so frightened that they had to sack this teacher. Even though she was brilliant and they all loved her,
Yeah.
they were terrified of her doppelganger. So they weren't scared of her, They were scared of
Just
her
that
double.
she kept rocking up every now
A
and
different,
again
well, a
when
copy.
she wasn't there.
Her copy, and they said that it was an uneasy feeling with the copy. They knew it was the copy
Whoa.
every time because it wasn't quite her.
So cool.
How cool is that story?
Crazy.
So this poor teacher, who was an excellent teacher,
Yeah.
she was completely unaware it was happening.
But
every school they'd say it, and then she'd just be like, oh, okay, that again. Here we go again.
same old story.
Same story.
Really good at what I do.
Sorry about that. I don't know what's going on. Look, I'll try and talk to her.
Yeah.
She'd never seen a doppelganger. She'd just been told about it.
That's crazy.
And it was affecting her whole life.
Oh, that'd affect your head.
Big time. So that's one of the coolest stories I've heard.
That's really cool.
So to follow that up, I'm going to tell you about Jimmy and the scariest instance of Jimmy's doppelganger. Now, I did touch on the one where we heard the bins. I'll quickly refresh that one in case you didn't listen to a previous episode. So there was one afternoon where it was Scarlett's day off. She was at kindy, so it was her day where she wasn't at kindy, and I was home with Scarlett and Clara. And when Jimmy would get home on a Monday, he would bring the bin down. That was his little ritual, little routine. So it was about 3:30, and that's early for Jimmy to get home, and we heard the bin rolling, and the girls ran to the window, and I ran after them, and we all looked out the window, and they were saying, "Daddy, Daddy!" And we all saw Jimmy walking down the lawn with the bin, with the wheelie bin, in his high-vis shirt. They got super excited, and they then ran to the front door and asked me to open it so they could run out and see Daddy. So then we all ran to the front door. I opened the front door, and then because our old door was a sliding door, there was a big fly screen window that we could see straight through.
Yeah.
So having opened the front heavy door, we look out and we see the bin still moving, rolling down the hill, and then falls flat on its face in the middle of the lawn. And there's no Jimmy, and there's no Jimmy's work car.
Yeah.
To which the girls looked at me and asked for an explanation. And I said, oh, he must have dropped the bin and gone to the shops. And that's all I could think of saying. But all three of us had seen him.
Yeah.
So that was the first time. But I'd also seen Jimmy in our old house in Scary Park, I should say.
Yeah.
And I would see him walking down the hall only to realise and see him like go into the back room, then walk through to the lounge and see him sitting on the couch. That happened a couple of times.
Yeah, you didn't tell me about that one.
Yeah, I did. Several times, I would think. And I just put it down to my eyes playing tricks on me.
Mm-hmm.
But then when this one happened, and then the next one, this is the scariest one. So it was a Sunday morning, and we'd been to Northam the day before.
Yep.
And so this was about 9 o'clock in the morning, and I was in the laundry putting a load of washing in the dryer because it was this time of year, so it was winter, and there was rain on the way, and we'd been talking about, we better light the fire so we can dry the washing, because I didn't want to do it all in the dryer. And as I'm standing at the washing machine, Jimmy walks behind me and didn't say anything or interact with me, which was odd, because generally when we pass each other, we generally crack a joke or give each other a cuddle or something. And then he went out the back door, down the back stairs towards where the wood is, which I can see out the laundry window. And then I called out to him twice. So I'd said, Jimmy, where are you going? And are you all right? And there was no response. And then I was like, what? Why is he cross with me? And then I got really cross because I thought, why is he being so rude? He's not talking to me. And then I look out the window, but on the way out, that's another weird thing. On his way out, Scarlett had come out the toilet and she'd seen him go out the back door.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, so she saw him too. This is after the fact. I was like, okay, I'm not going crazy because Scarlett saw him as well.
Yeah.
So as I'm standing watching this Jimmy version of, standing with his head down, staring at the axe and the wood, I'm thinking he's completely lost it. He's going to grab that axe and come and axe murder us. Like, that was what I'm thinking. That's my first thought. Because he hadn't responded. He'd gone straight out to the wood pile and he looked weird. And so, like, even down to his jumper, his entire outfit, he had no shoes on, he had pyjama pants and his jumper on because it was Sunday morning. You know, you don't get out of your jammy pants till at least 10 on a Sunday. So I'm standing there going, then I said, Jimmy! I'm calling out the window, Jimmy, what's wrong? And then I hear from our bedroom, Morgan, what's what? What is it? And Jimmy responds from the friggin' bedroom. And I'm standing there, like, keeping a lock. My eyes locked on this man. It's Jimmy. It's 100% you. I'm keeping my eyes locked on him, scared to look away because I can hear Jimmy in the front room, but I'm like, who is the man staring at the axe that looks identical to my husband? And then I did remember bursting into tears, and I ran through.
Yeah. No, I remember.
I ran through and I grabbed a jumper and I said, there's a man in the garden.
Mm-hmm.
And then we both ran to the back door, unlocked it, and I ran out there and there was nobody. And then I got even more freaked out.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that was pretty creepy.
It was really creepy. And I know you're probably all going...
More so for you.
Yeah, well, not for you. You're none the wiser. But this was a Sunday morning. This is why I'm like, what? Because if it had been nighttime and it was scary and windy and you could put it down to wind or shadows, it wasn't a shadow. It was completely solid Jimmy.
Yeah. Totally weird.
Totally weird. So I can't explain that one. And Scarlett still remembers it. I asked her the other day about it. She said, yeah, I remember that. That was so weird. Because she said she'd seen you go out the door.
Yeah.
And then she said she'd walked through to the lounge and then saw that you were in the bedroom. And she remembers thinking, why the hell did Daddy get there so fast?
Yeah.
So she was sort of like,
Yeah.
as well. So explain that one.
No, I got nothing.
So that links in to all of this now. Good news.
Yeah.
Apparently, in one of the old folklores,
Yeah.
the Norse folklore, I believe it is. We'll go with that one.
Okay.
If you see a doppelganger in the morning, it's not a bad omen.
Oh.
If you see it in the afternoon, it's a harbinger of death.
Oh.
So that was the morning. So
Good times.
good times.
Good times.
So and you didn't see it, so we're all good. We're all okay. So on to another famous
Holy moly.
doppelganger. I'll go with the one I've labelled, this one is nuts.
Okay. Do that one.
So professional here at Spooky Town
I
Tales.
like that category. Do that one.
This one is nuts category. So in 1906 in Parliament, British Parliament, there was a member of Parliament, Sir Gilbert Parker, and he was attending a debate. He spotted one of his fellow parliamentarians, or whatever they're called, Sir Frederick Khan Rask. Now, he was sitting nearby and he was quite shocked because they all knew that he was horribly unwell and he'd been unable to come into work.
Yep.
So they all knew he was in, had really bad flu, he was bedridden with it. And so he was like, oh. And so he looked over and he said, oh, I hope you're feeling better. To which there was nothing. Same as what happened with you.
Ooh, nothing.
No reply. Just no
Cold shoulder.
reaction, just a stony, grim expression. Just like, looking forward, didn't respond.
Yep.
When he looked back again, because he obviously got a bit like, oh, okay, looked away. And then when he looked back, the seat was empty, completely empty. So he's like, what? Where did he go?
Oh, as you would.
So he went out when there was like when they all go out and they have like a recess.
Yeah.
He was just having a chat with a few of them and just mentioned that he'd spotted Khan sitting amongst the parliamentarians, and they said, "Did you see him leave?" Because he was like one of his close companions. He's like,
Yeah.
"Did you see him leave? Is he okay?" And they're all like, "No, but we'd all seen him as well.
Whoa.
We all saw him sitting there and wondered where he'd gone as well." So so most of this parliament saw this man who was not supposed to be there. They all knew was very unwell, just sitting there and just taking it all in.
Wasn't it?
The real Khan Rask was literally sick in bed all day. He hadn't moved from his bed.
Yeah.
And when he found out about the incident, he wasn't surprised at all because he said, I really wanted to take part in that debate, so I was wishing I spent... It made sense that my spirit came along and watched it. Like, he was completely unsurprised by it.
Fair enough.
So that's pretty odd. Unfortunately, poor old bloke, it became quite an annoying thing to live with because from that moment on, every time he was in Parliament on a debate, someone would poke him to make sure he was real. Like, literally every time it was a thing. They were like, oh, yep, it's you. It's you. So
how annoying.
That became a thing. Really annoying. Now, another famous speaking of Parliament,
Yep.
another famous president who's experienced a doppelganger was Abraham Lincoln
Really?
in a mirror in his bedroom. He saw it, and so did his wife on a few occasions.
Yeah.
The wife who witnessed it, the way it was basically, it appeared as his face, so his actual reflection, and then this other version of his face that was puckered and pale and looked deathly, like a corpse, basically.
Whoa.
So she foresaw that as him being voted in for a second term, but not surviving it.
Okay.
And what happened to Abraham Lincoln?
Wow.
He was assassinated midway through his second term, so he never completed his second term. So she was spot on with how she'd interpreted it. She got really frightened by it.
That's crazy.
So not just Abe, but his wife. They both saw it. He saw it. She saw it twice. He saw it 3 times.
That's crazy.
And it disappeared for a while, and then he died shortly after the last time they saw it. So there you go. Abe Lincoln has seen one.
Wow.
Yep. Another well-known historical figure was Catherine the Great, who was the Empress of Russia in the 18th century.
Yeah.
This one is friggin' weird as well. So she's hanging out. She's doing what you do when you're Catherine the Great.
Yeah.
And her servants come rushing in. Oh, sorry, she was in bed. So her servants came rushing in, very worried and concerned, and said, "We've just seen you walk into the throne room."
Okay.
And so she's like, "What do you mean?" I said, we saw you. We've just seen you walk into the throne room. So much so that they've got her out. She's got out of bed.
Yeah.
They've all charged into the throne room. Sure enough, sitting calmly on the throne is Catherine the Great. It's her absolute doppelganger. It's her.
Whoa.
Sitting very calmly.
They took her in there.
Hey?
And they took her in there.
No, they took the real Catherine in there.
Yeah.
Because they said, "There's a woman that you're in there. We're freaking out. Come and see." So then Catherine the Great ordered the guards to shoot her doppelganger, and the bullets just went straight through, and then she disappeared, and then shortly after that she died. Catherine the Great died.
What?
Yeah.
From what?
I don't know what. I think it was just like illness of some sort.
That is so weird.
Yeah.
It's like you said, it's one that if you see it.
Yeah, so she saw her doppelganger and she died. Abraham Lincoln saw his and he died shortly after.
Whoa, man.
Yep, so that's another one. Whereas the bloke in Parliament didn't see his.
So
he
he was
didn't
just
die.
hanging out.
He lived a pretty
He just
normal
got
life after that,
poked.
aside from being poked all the time. Yeah, poor guy. Yeah, so that's another super weird one. I'm going to read a few more modern ones, and then I'll read a few more of the old spooky ones. Oh, these are so weird, these ones. So basically, this one you'll be like, what the hell? I've got a head breaker for later. I've literally labelled it scientific head breaker.
Excellent.
But until then, I'm just going to read you this one.
That's a bit next level from the other
It's next
category.
level. I've got to keep warming you up a little bit. So, there were 2 women that were born on the same day, but 157 years apart.
Right.
They died on the same day, 157 years apart. So, born on the same day, they died on the same day, 157 years apart.
Wow.
They both met up with a friend, put on a new dress, went to a dance, and met their killers at a dance.
Whoa, what?
This is where it gets even worse. They were killed the same way, in the same spot, both by men named Thornton, who both were acquitted of the murders in both cases.
What? That's not real.
Yep, so that happened. How weird is that?
How do you just project your whole life?
I don't know. So this poor woman, who 157 years after, it all happened all over again.
That is insane.
Yeah, because the police records, it all matches.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Holy
along the lines of crimes and criminals, there was a bloke who spent 17 years in jail
Yeah.
until he ran into his own doppelganger. Well, not a doppelganger in this case, it was a dead ringer.
Yeah.
But weird at the same time because he had the exact same name and he was in the same jail.
Whoa.
And he looked exactly the same as him.
Right.
So he was released then shortly after, and then whoops, daisy, we've had two guys with we've had the same two guys in here. So now, next level as to why that shouldn't have happened was back in 1903. There was two men called William West that were identical. I've got a mugshot here, and I'm going to actually put this on the page so you can see it. So these are different. These are guys that aren't related to. I'm showing Jimmy the mugshot. They're not related. They're both called William West.
Same dude.
Yeah, it's the same dude. I swear to God.
Yeah.
They were both sent to Leavenworth Prison at the same time. And after some confusion, the staff understood that they were two different prisoners with the exact same name who looked exactly alike. Now, these guys are part of the reason why fingerprints are now used as identification.
Yeah.
So that's why they started introducing that, because it's just crazy how alike they are.
Yeah.
So that's
crazy.
Pretty friggin' crazy. Now, to bring it back locally, because I know there's not been many there's only been one that was in Donnybrook, which is my own. But to bring it back to some local stories, when I was interviewing a family about their experiences a few weeks ago, the daughter had said on several occasions she had seen her mum walking through the house ahead of her, and when she called out to her, she didn't acknowledge her.
Oh, okay.
And this was a regular thing. She said it would happen quite often. And she even at one instance said she saw herself being carried by her mum walking through the house, as though it was more of like a time loop kind of a thing.
That's pretty crazy.
But her mum would never respond. Like, she could see what was happening and she was calling out to her, but never got a response.
Whoa.
And another interesting story that I have from another lady that I was interviewing, I won't mention her name.
Yeah.
She was saying as a young girl, her family would regularly see her walking around the house at night time. So in the wee small hours.
Yeah.
They'd see her walking around the house, just doing normal things, going to the fridge, just walking around.
Yeah.
And on several occasions they would all get up and watch her, because after a while they realised a few times that they saw her, she was still asleep in her bed.
Whoa.
And they'd all seen it. So whenever they heard her up, they would all get up to check and see whether she was still in bed. And on one night, in particular, I think there was a couple of family members were following behind her, watching her walk down the hall. When she got to the threshold of her room, she vanished. And then right behind her, they could see she was asleep in bed.
Whoa.
And she said this was her whole family had witnessed it. She obviously hadn't. She was fast asleep.
She was asleep. That is crazy.
So is that possibly astral projection, bilocation? I don't know.
Bioluminescence.
Bioluminescence. What? Maybe there was acid in the water. I don't know.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So that was a really cool local one.
Yeah, that's really
That
cool.
was a WA resident.
Yeah.
So yeah. Have you ever seen a family member? This is my thing. Here I go. I'm going. What's happening? So many people have probably seen a doppelganger and not realised, because generally a doppelganger
is a copy.
It's a copy of someone you know well. Which is why I thought you were this person going out to get wood. We'd just been talking about lighting the fire.
Yeah.
Why isn't he talking to me? Just think how many times you may pass your partner in the house or a roommate or anyone and just think it's them because it's commonplace. It's just the scenery.
Yeah.
Only to maybe find out they weren't home.
That's weird. Yeah. It's totally possible.
It could happen all the time and just not realise.
Yeah.
You might not realise because, you don't investigate every time you see your roommate walk through the kitchen, do you?
No, of course.
You don't keep a little calendar.
No.
So could they be around us all the time and we've got little copies of people just wandering around?
Who knows?
No one knows. It's an interesting little theory.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, more interesting stories. I've got one here. Jonathan Wolfgang von Goethe.
That's a good name.
Goethe. He was the author of, forgive my pronunciation, Dichtung und Wahrheit.
Good job.
Which is translated to poetry and truth.
Very good.
So he basically saw himself. He another famous person who saw himself. He was emotional and lost in thought. One day he was walking along and he looked up to see a man dressed in a grey suit, trimmed in gold, who appeared briefly and then vanished. 8 years later, he was travelling the same road to visit the same woman that he was at that time, and he realised he was wearing that very grey suit trimmed in gold that he'd seen of his double 8 years earlier. So he wrote about it.
That's crazy.
Yeah, so basically he saw himself 8 years before
It had
it had happened.
That's pretty cool.
And he only realised once he was riding up the road and he looked down and went, oh my God.
Hang on a minute. I've
This
worn
is
this
the
before.
suit. I've seen this suit before. Oh no. So another term for a doppelganger is a fetch.
Fetch.
And that's an Irish term. So that's basically it's a spectral double of a living person. So it's pretty much the same thing.
Yeah.
Whose appearance is regarded as ominous. So
The more evil type.
yeah, it's if you see it, you're stuffed, basically. So basically, it was associated a lot, this term, the fetch, is associated a lot with sailors. Because apparently there's been a lot of stories of sailors seeing themselves and then dying at sea. It's like a bad omen.
Like we were saying before, they're crossed over between cultures.
Yes.
It's totally weird.
So it was a bad sign for a sailor to see himself. I mean,
It goes without saying,
goes
really.
without saying. They probably all had scurvy anyway. Anyway, so a tale of this occurring was in 1893. Vice Admiral George Tyrone, he was a commanding officer of two columns of ships off the coast of Syria. He gave a command for them to turn towards each other. It was basically a majestic naval drill manoeuvre.
Mm-hmm.
And it was an amateur mistake because basically the ships rammed into each other.
No.
Yeah. So he was showing off and he stuffed it. Got it. He totally royally stuffed it. So one of them, the Tryon, happened. Sorry about this. Tryon. It wasn't Tyrone. So it was Vice Admiral George Tryon. So the ship that he was on sank like a stone. Went down real quick. He died knowing that he just doomed 357 men to their death. So as he died, apparently, this is devastating. His last words were, "It's entirely my fault."
Oh.
Isn't that so sad? So at that exact moment, Tryon's wife was holding a lavish party with their friends in London. So that's where they were from. Suddenly, to the guests' surprise, Tryon appeared at the party silently. He walked down the staircase and then solemnly proceeded through the drawing room and opened the door as if to leave before he suddenly disappeared. So the whole party of people saw him.
That's pretty cool.
At the same moment that he drowned in Syria, off the coast of Syria.
Yeah.
There are holes in the story, though, because some say that Lady Tryon was busy with the guests and she never saw the doppelganger, while others claim she was one of the onlookers. Still, it's it's basically a trademark sailor's fetch sort of tale of seeing a double just before they die.
That's pretty crazy.
Yeah, so that's another example of another one. Now, there was another author, and I don't think I've written it down, but there was another poet. He ended up in an insane asylum. Insane asylum.
We sail boats all the time.
He did. So this one could just be put down to being a complete nutter.
Yeah.
But apparently he had his doppelganger would show up in his study when he was writing.
Yeah.
And then one day he says the doppelganger dictated a story and he wrote it down. And that's one of his famous books.
Okay.
Was actually written by his doppelganger.
Yeah. Himself.
And he kept showing up, apparently, this doppelganger, and each time he got more and more upset and anxious because he was sure
it
meant he was...
Yep.
So it drove him mad to the point he got committed, and then he died shortly after. But so I'm pretty sure from memory they did diagnose him with syphilis.
Oh.
Which rots your brain,
Messes his
basically.
brain up.
So it could just be that one you can disregard, I think.
Yeah.
As just being a bit of a nutter.
Yeah.
Due to having syphilis. Don't get syphilis, kids.
No, it's not good for you.
Practice safe sex. Yeah. That got bad real quick.
Yeah,
Yeah.
straight in the gutter.
Now that I've warmed you up, I think you're ready for the head breaker.
Yep.
Okay. So it was more than 2 decades ago, a neuropsychologist at the University Hospital in Zurich, Switzerland, was very interested in explanations to the paranormal. So he wanted to find scientific reasons
Yeah.
to paranormal things. So he became fascinated with a young man in particular who had tried, well, they thought he'd nearly killed himself, but he wasn't actually intending to kill himself. He basically jumped out of a window to try and ground himself back in reality because he said he couldn't tell which of him was him. And so this doctor was like, okay, well, I need to know what's going on. I need to research what the hell's happened. So basically, this bloke had instead of going to work one day, he decided to drink a lot of beer and stay in bed.
Good solution.
He's like, I'm not doing it.
No, I'm not getting drunk.
So this is back...
so much better.
This is, back... I think it was in, like, the 80s. I think it was in the 80s. So he's like, no. And he didn't... And he was also on medication. He's like, I'm not taking my medication. I'm not going to work. I'm going to drink beer and stay in bed. Which he did. Turned out to be a bit of a scary thing to do. So he felt dizzy. Then he stood up and turned around and he saw himself still lying in bed. Now he became aware that the person in bed was him and was not willing to get up. So thus would make him late for work. So he'd had a change of heart. He's like, I'm gonna be late. Get out of bed. Couldn't get himself out of bed. So furious with himself, the man shouted at it, shook it, and even jumped on it to no avail. To complicate things further, his awareness of being in the body would shift from one body to another. So 1 minute he'd be in the one in the bed, and 1 minute he'd be in the body jumping on himself.
What?
So complete freak out. So he got so overwhelmed and confused, he didn't know who he was. So he jumped out the window.
Whoa.
Because he's like, if I jump out the window, at least I'll know it's me. I'll feel the pain of it. It'll wake me up. So basically this lucky bugger, there happened to be a hazel bush below the window.
So it caught in a tree, at
He
least.
got caught in a bush. It broke his fall and he didn't die. So they later discovered that he did have a tumour in his temporal lobe, which they removed. And apparently after they removed that, the seizures and the bizarre experiences stopped. So he stopped having these weird occurrences. So the Greek term for these types of hallucination is autoscopy.
Okay.
Or autoscopic phenomenon. So it's basically where you, you see yourself. You see a copy of yourself.
Yeah.
So autos means self and scopio means looking at. So looking at yourself.
Yep.
So this poor bloke, it started off basically, this incident got this doctor into, right, I've got to research this more. I've got to find out what the hell's going on here.
Yeah.
So he started testing people's brains and putting little electrodes in the brain. Rather than putting them on the skull, they were putting them in the skull so they could actually more accurately read which parts of your brain are stimulated in various
doing what
things.
Yep.
And they found there is a part of your brain that basically grounds you in your own body. So they worked out if they stimulated part of the brain of people with epilepsy, they could induce out-of-body experiences. So they could force a person to see themselves
from a different angle.
Basically to like be above themselves, looking at themselves, be beside themselves, looking at themselves by triggering a certain part of the brain. So like a visual double. So this particular part of your brain is basically what roots us in ourselves.
Right. So
these sorts of hallucinations, these out-of-body experiences, as they're called, or OBEs, as they're called, technical terms, they're hallucinations caused by malfunctions in brain mechanisms that root us in the here and now.
Yeah.
So it's basically our sense of bodily self. Our brain builds up like a perception of us being in the here and now. Our brain builds that for us. And basically the subjective emotional feelings that dominate our consciousness. It's all built by our brain. And if you tamper with your brain...
You can move it.
You can move it.
What the hell?
You can manipulate it. Which, yeah, that's my head breaker, guys.
I felt more in my own skin before, but now I don't.
Yeah. So that's pretty cool. And they did this test on healthy brains too. So it wasn't just people suffering from neurological conditions. So they've discovered that there is a particular part of our brain that basically keeps us in our bodies.
What?
Like our perception. And this was them trying to explain why it was normal, a scientific explanation. For me, I'm like, that's even worse.
That's way worse.
Anyway, I'll look more into that and try and explain it in a more scientific way so that it's more comforting, because that's how I read it. It's just like, what?
Yeah, that's terrible.
That doesn't explain out-of-body experiences as being
that just
scientific.
Says you've got another option
It just
to look at yourself from a different camera view.
Or if you accidentally bump your head on something, you might just jump out your body.
Yeah.
I don't know. So it's got to do with the way our eyes take in and create an image of what it is. So without that, do we see completely differently? Do we see in other dimensions? Do we have the ability to... I mean, we all know that there's certain animals that can see more than we see.
Yeah.
Different spectrums, etc.
But not from completely different perspectives.
I don't know how that works. I still can't figure that out. If any of you can explain it to me, if you're in the medical world or a scientist, you can explain how stimulating part of your brain can make you be able to see yourself lying in bed.
No. Not even close to my brain being able to work that one out.
Yeah. I don't know. Anyway, there's a little bit of a head breaker for you. Now, on that note, we are winding up to the end of this episode. Now, I can't end the episode leaving you all like going, having an existential crisis. So to ground you back in reality and have a bit of a positive story, while I was researching doppelgangers and things, I did come across this. Isn't a doppelganger, but it's a bloody cool little story. So Jeanne Calment is the world's longest living person. Right. She was born in France in 1875. She saw the Eiffel Tower being built. She sold coloured pencils to Vincent van Gogh when she was 13.
Whoa.
She began fencing when she was 85.
Whoa.
Rode her bicycle when she was 100. She appeared in a film at 114. She was the subject of a documentary at 120. And she died at the age of 122.
What?
Now, this is the good news, folks. She also ate more than 2 pounds of chocolate a week, drank lots of port wine, and smoked for 96 years.
Wow.
So there you go.
Yep.
She did whatever the hell she wanted.
Make it work.
And and from what I can see, I think she had a moustache.
Fantastic.
Good on you, Jeanne.
Taking up all the hobbies.
I think she's found the secret to a long life is giving no fucks. Good on you. Not as many local stories this week, I do apologise, but I thought you'd find this all very fascinating as I do. I just fell down the rabbit hole big time with this one. And if you've had any experiences with people that you've thought were someone and weren't actually them, I'd love to hear about it.
Yeah, send them in.
Send them in, please. And yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this Doppelganger episode. And if you've got any other stories, you know where to send them. Southern Paranormal page, please, or audreybramble@mail.com. I would love to hear your stories. Please like and share the show with anyone you think would get a hoot out of it. And I look forward to sharing more creepy, kooky stuff with you in the coming weeks. So be sure to check back every Friday night on the Southern Paranormal page. And thank you once again for listening to Spooky Town Tales. I'm Morgan.
No, I'm Jimmy.
Stay creepy. Bye.